Hello, this is Jason Matthews. I am a retired law enforcement officer, and today I'm going to be answering the question, are the police corrupt? And I'm going to give you my answer here in a moment at the beginning of the video, and then I'm going to explain my answer in great detail. And I think you're going to be very surprised about my answer. But before we get started, if you support the police, click the like button. And if you do not support the police, click the dislike button. It's anonymous. I'm just curious of where you stand, and let me explain myself why so far in every video I put out, I asked this question. As I said, I'm just curious, and the reason why I'm curious is when I go online and I go to social media and I see videos on YouTube, it's very divisive concerning the police. There's very strong supporters of the police, and then I see people who are very much against the police. So I'm just curious, you watching these videos that I put out, where do you stand? Let your voice be heard, and feel free to comment below now or throughout the video. Okay, let's go ahead and get started, and I'm going to give you my answer to the question, are police corrupt? And the answer that I have, based on my experience in law enforcement of decades, is yes, the police are corrupt. Now let me explain myself. Let's back out here a little bit. Let's zoom out and let's see the bigger picture. We have to understand that police are human. Police are human beings, and human beings, we are corrupt. Now, there's levels here that we have to consider. Human beings are corrupt because of survival instinct. What I mean is humans, by their nature, generally speaking, will take advantage of situations for their benefit. This is conscious and unconscious. For example, if someone is offered something that will benefit them in their lives, people will generally take that opportunity if they think that they can get away with it. It takes someone with very high standards and very high ethics to resist that temptation, and they really have to be conscious of their survival instinct. And like I said many times, that is in the subconscious mind. Many times we do things that we're not even aware of or don't even think about consciously. So this is fundamental to human behavior. And police are not exempt. Now, like I said, there are levels. Now, myself, I prided myself in my career. I had extremely high ethics and extremely high standards for myself. I would say I was in the top 1% of police. I held myself to a very high standard, whereas others did not. And there's all these different levels in between. So there's the extreme of myself with very high standards, and high standards of myself and others in my profession. And then there's the opposite extreme, where there's just straight out criminal activity happening on the behalf of the police. Both extremes are rare. Everyone else probably lands somewhere in between. So I was thinking when I was planning this talk here and my answer, I was thinking about some of the things that I did that was corrupt in my career. And it was very hard to think of something that I did that was corrupt. However, some of the things I could think of is speeding off duty, and not by much. Now, when I saw myself when I was speeding off duty, I told myself, I need to hold myself to a high standard. So when I noticed when I was speeding, I would slow down immediately. So maybe I was going 5 miles over the speed limit, 10 miles over the speed limit, no more than that. And then I would immediately recognize it and slow down, and many times I would just use cruise control. Other things I could think of, maybe going home early, 5 minutes early, 10 minutes early. These are very low levels of corruption here. But again, I held myself to a high standard, and I was the exception. So another level, we could go up another level and we could talk about people being hired by supervisors that were their friends, their buddies, their family members, officers regularly speeding while off duty. One thing I can think of is evidence. I saw officers sometimes waiting until the next day to transfer the evidence from a safe that they put it in, because what normally happens is if you collect evidence from a case, it goes into a safe, normally speaking. And then from there, all the paperwork gets filled out and it gets sealed into an evidence container, whether that be a plastic bag or whatever the case may be. And then it gets labeled and dated with a time, location, etc., the circumstances of the case. And sometimes I saw officers who would put that in a safe and then they would wait until the next day to fill out the paperwork. And yeah, that's a policy violation. Nothing major, nothing changed in those circumstances about the case, yet it was a policy violation. From there, another level I could say that I saw, me personally, and I'm a veteran, so I saw people intentionally trying not to hire veterans, which I think is completely ridiculous, because those preference laws are in place for a reason, and it's not the supervisor's job to be trying to go around veterans. Another example I could give, in my case, I was in maximum security prison earlier in my career. At the very beginning of my career, I started out as a correctional officer in maximum security. One thing I saw that I brought up anonymously is I saw officers, and other officers saw this also and were concerned about it. Some officers were taking tobacco products into the shoe. If you don't know what the shoe is like what the public thinks as solitary confinement. It's not actually solitary confinement because there's usually 2 people in a cell, but it's the disciplinary unit of the prison where the worst of the worst are or who have committed disciplinary violations or law violations in the prison. Whether they've assaulted someone or they've brought drugs in, etc. Could be a variety of different things. But I had noticed that officers were taking tobacco products into these inmates, and smoking was prohibited, and they were prohibited from having tobacco products inside the shoe. The shoe also depends on where you work. Sometimes it's called the shoe, the special housing unit, the hole. It has different names. But I saw these officers, and it started out really small, taking individual cigarettes into the shoe, special housing unit, and then it progressed to large amounts going in to the special housing unit. And what was happening basically is these inmates were corrupting these officers. And that's not good, especially in a maximum security prison, because the security of a maximum security prison is paramount. And if you have corrupt correctional officers, that risks the security of the institution. And what was ironic about it is the officers, their excuse was, well, we need to bring these tobacco products into the special housing unit and give them to the inmates so they'll give us information about what's going on in the institution. What they didn't understand is they're being corrupted at the same time, and it got worse and worse and worse. And I brought this up anonymously to management, and management knew about it. Management was allowing this to happen. Another incident that I thought was corruption that I saw in my career was there was a supervisor that for years did not come to work except for on rare circumstances. For example, training and mandatory events. But other than that, this individual was at their house for years, and management knew about it. This was brought up to management by myself and by other officers. Totally unacceptable And that is absolute corruption. Now, to what level you decide, I'll let you make that decision. I'd say it's pretty high level, not extreme level, which I'm going to talk about right now. And that is, at an extreme level, I've heard about, and I actually have never seen, these allegations of, for example, officers blatantly violating people's rights, which if you watch YouTube, you can find examples of this. But we have to understand also, when we talk about police corruption, YouTube is not a good place to gauge that, because we have to understand there are thousands of jurisdictions out in the United States, be it federal, state, and local jurisdictions, and there's thousands of officers working in those same jurisdictions. And how many interactions does one officer have with the public in one day? So for me, for example, I could have hundreds of interactions with the public, just me by myself in one day of work. Hundreds of interactions with people. So I don't know you can do the math on that, but I mean, that has to be every day of all the interactions, could be millions of interactions that officers have with the public. Only a very small percentage show up on YouTube. And so it distorts the reality. It distorts the public's perception. And I'm going to do a video about body cameras in the future, whether I support them or not, whether they are positive or negative for law enforcement, the pluses and the minuses, and whether I think law enforcement should be wearing body cameras. Another extreme that I could mention that I've heard about but never seen is officers planting drugs. There's a lot of allegations. You hear that all the time. I've never seen it in my career. I don't know how it could happen. First of all, where would they get these drugs in the first place, these officers? Drugs aren't just floating around in the department. Yeah, it's possible, but officers would say something about that, and it would get squashed pretty quickly, unless it's a very small department, I believe. And evidence is highly controlled. You can't just take evidence out of the evidence room and use it. Everything is logged. And like I said before, yeah, some officers put it in a safe and do not tag it until the next day, but it's still secured. You can't just go in there and just grab whatever you want. So I have my doubts about that. Even though I say it's possible, I'd say highly unlikely. So these are the different levels of law enforcement. If you can think of any other levels of corruption and examples, comment down below. Now, let me move on and say why I believe that law enforcement, the average law enforcement officer, is much less corrupt than the average person in society. You see all these people commenting in the social media and on YouTube saying police are fundamentally corrupt. And like I said in my answer, it depends on the level now. One reason why police are much less corrupt than the average person in society is police have to go through background checks, and in some cases, security clearances. And that means that you cannot have committed other than minor misdemeanors, meaning probably Class B, Class C misdemeanors, infractions in your life. Otherwise, you cannot get hired into law enforcement. I think you can have taken marijuana, smoked marijuana, whatever. I never did. But I believe if there's a certain amount of time between when these incidents happen to when you get hired, exceptions can be made. But they're not wide exceptions. Another reason why the average police officer is much less corrupt than the average citizen is. In my case, for example, I was in Police Explorers and I knew exactly what I wanted to do when I was a teenager, even as a kid. And I came from a law enforcement family. So I kept myself clean. I did not break the law knowing that I wanted a career in law enforcement, and I had to hold myself to a high standard in order to get into law enforcement. And this is frequent. Many people know they want to go into law enforcement. That's their career calling. And so they don't want to jeopardize that. So I hope you understand now why I can say police are corrupt, yes. But how corrupt? And the answer varies. It varies. Police can be corrupt to a very low level, or police can be corrupt to a very high level. And there's everything in between, and the vast majority are somewhere in between. But they're much less corrupt than the average person in society. Because the average person in society doesn't have the standards and the policies and the laws that they have to follow like the police do. Yes, they have to follow laws, or there's consequences, possible consequences, but they're not held to the standard that police are held. Police have to follow this daily. If you have any comments, comment down below. If you enjoyed this video, click the subscribe button and ring the notification bell to be notified when new videos are released. Take care. Have a great day.